defines a generation. Music is a soundtrack of revolution. Music is a soundtrack of movement. Music is a soundtrack of cause. There is an intersection of politics and pop culture that you didn't even know existed. There's some boy, some girl sitting in a cubicle along K Street, somewhere in DC. A boy, a girl sitting in a cubicle along a hill with a Capitol with a dome who has single-handedly decided what you wore today. Whoa.
Mike Muse is an industrial engineer, a music executive, a political architect. He breaks down the intersection of politics and pop culture. This is the Mike Muse Show.
What's happening in the world? It's your boy Mike Muse, and thank you so much for joining us here on Sirius XM Insight Channel for the Mike Muse Show. As always, promise you awesome content with fascinating conversation with unique and interesting guests. And this week, I'm not going to disappoint you. So thank you so much for tuning in every Wednesday and for following along with me and tweeting me and DMing me and asking me all kind of questions, man. I just want to just say thank you. So basically, I just want to follow up with the conversation we've been having these past couple of weeks and really just talking about what does the electorate want in 2020 and what is happening in our state of politics and what is happening in our culture, if you will, and what are we looking for in our candidates. And I couldn't think of a better person to join me in this conversation. This gentleman I have been a fan of for a very long time. He introduced me to the southern style of rap and this unique twisting of voices with his group UGK. Since then, he has gone on to have tremendous success in the hip-hop industry, but also, too, as a professor at Rice University. And also, too, he has this incredible voice in hip-hop and in politics. And as you know, this is something that I'm really big up on, is this activism your own way and having unique, interesting voices participate and advance our conversation. And ladies and gentlemen, I'm talking about no other than Mr. Bun B. What's happening, Bun?
I'm good, Mike. Thank you for having me, man. I'm good, man. It's been a long day, but I still got some energy left for this conversation.
Yeah, and it's been a long day because you are promoting your new album that's coming out on Friday, August the 31st.
Yes.
Return of the Trill.
Return of the Trill.
So, Bun B, why did you want to return?
Well, I felt like there were things that needed to be said and represented from hip hop culture, and a lot of the people who represent hip hop culture now they're in a younger age bracket, and I don't think that maybe a lot of them are as informed as we would like them to be, or maybe they should be or could be. But we don't knock people for not knowing what they don't know. You know what I'm saying? But it's the ones like me who do know and do have an understanding and an ability to break this stuff down for people. It's when people like myself don't get engaged that we really start having problems.
Yeah. You and UGK were known for your features,
yes.
Right? Why was that so important for you guys to be featured the way it was in terms of spreading the sound of Houston and that South region, that particular that you come from?
We didn't want to be boxed in, you know what I'm saying? We didn't want to be boxed in and locked into one particular demographic. We felt that we had music, content, and themes that would resonate with most people if they heard it, and if it was presented to them right. So we tried to make sure we made those presentations very clear with our own group music, and then when we would feature on other people's projects, make sure that people didn't get a misunderstanding of who we are and what we represented when we were on that project.
You said something really interesting, and you said something about making sure people understand it from their perspective and what you're coming from. You have had this awesome voice in politics, and citizens, as you know, I deal particularly with this. I love intersecting politics and pop culture and getting individuals involved to understand what is happening. And I've had the pleasure of talking to Bun, in particular, during certain moments. And the moment that we got a chance to really connect, Bun, was during Hurricane Harvey that took place in Houston. And you were on the ground reporting and giving us updates on a daily and weekly basis on what was going on. And it was through there I got a chance to learn your political constitution and learn what it is that you care about. Why is it important for you to be that voice? And do you feel that you have responsibility with your platform to help advocate and to advance these narratives?
Yeah, well, my platform isn't meant for me to just, get into clubs free or get a good table at a restaurant. It's, hip hop as a culture was initially designed to inform, educate people, inspire people, but also to have a good time. So in our music, we do make sure that we have entertainment value in there, but we also want educational value too, because a lot of people, even if they're looking for guidance or instruction, sometimes they won't take it from the people around them. So I know that we have influence with a lot of people based on the connection that we have with them with our music. So we try to use that as a way to let them know about things that they should know about, or give them a little bit better insight into things that they're curious about but don't really have frame of references for. So, when we talk about, like, a big thing for UGK was spirituality. And, for young dudes in the street that were living kind of reckless, whatever point you guys wanted to stop doing what you were doing and give your life over to God and do that, we want to let them know that that was going to be available to them. For young people who were concerned about the circumstances of their community and the conditions that they were living in, we wanted to give them information on how to address it properly, who they need to be talking to, and what they need to say when they see those people. So we just want to give people direction, real life direction, if they need it, no matter what age, race, class, or gender they are.
What's interesting when you say that, though, when you think about Houston and you think about the Fifth Ward, Fifth Ward is really reflective of a lot of other urban cities across the country.
Yes.
And a lot of individuals who live in these communities feel disengaged. They feel like their politicians and the political system isn't listening to them. It isn't working for them. I'm thinking about places like Baltimore. I'm thinking of places like Chicago, Detroit. Even here in New York City. What do you say to those individuals that would make them want to say that, all right, I can participate. So if I do participate, I feel like something may be able to happen?
You got to find places where you trust the information. You know what I'm saying? So if you're watching television and you don't trust television, and maybe look at newspapers. If you don't trust the newspapers, then you got to find some kind of website or something that speaks to what you're about, something that you can relate to. And then when you do find these places, you got to look for candidates that you can get behind, people that are talking about things that resonate with you and people who care about things that you care about. And then you got to get out and support those people. You know what I'm saying? You got to register to vote. Then you got to go out and vote and be active. And a lot of times in the black community, people only really talk about voting when there's a presidential election. But the reality is that it's your local elections that affect you on a day-to-day basis. It's your councilmen, it's your aldermen, it's your state representatives and your state senators. These are the people that actually make the day-to-day decisions that affect the street that you live on.
What I hear a lot of times too is people feel they're intimidated by politics.
Right.
They believe that, I didn't go to college. I may not have a law degree.
I don't watch CNN.
I don't watch
Fox,
CNN. Or Fox. They don't read the New York Times. So they feel like they don't have the ability or even can participate in this political system and political structure. How did you break through that barrier to say, you know what, I'm going to go for it. I'm going to dive in. What made you, go through the wall and not being intimidated by it, right? And so what kind of message could you send to others to say, don't be afraid to start the conversation?
Well, unfortunately, I'm old enough. I'm pretty old now, 45 years old.
That's not old, bun.
But I'm old enough to remember when they taught civics in school, right? So there used to be lessons in place in schools in America that would give children a frame of reference for politics and what their civic duty is and what their obligations as a citizen of a community is. And we simply don't teach children that at a young age. If your parents aren't talking about it, you don't know. When you want information and your parents don't have that information or can't give you that information, then you go to other people who you respect. You know what I'm saying? People who you like the way they live their life, you like the way they carry themselves, you like their opinions on other things. And then you go to those people, then hopefully their opinions on the political situations in your city, your community, help open your eyes up to what it is that you need to be aware of. And I realized very early on that a lot of my contemporaries, a lot of my peers, were not well read in terms of politics. They did not tune into a lot of political shows. They don't, a lot of black families are in church on Sunday morning, so they're not watching This Week with George Stephanopoulos. They don't watch Face the Nation, right? So if we want that information to get to people in our communities, then we have to give it to them through whatever outlet we have. My outlet is my music. So I use that as a way to express different opinions on different things and try to slip those messages in, you know what I'm saying? A little bit of sugar instead of vinegar,
But see, but I take the perspective with you is that it's okay if you don't watch those programs. And I think that reason why people have chosen to opt out of our democratic process is because they feel like they don't watch those programs or they don't subscribe to that newspaper. Right. And therefore they don't have the voice to be able to participate. And so I think it's important. The reason I really wanted you on here is because I just celebrate the work that you're doing. And I'm so thankful that you have accepted your responsibility to say that you are politics. You are what democracy represents.
Yeah.
And and hopefully that others would see that and feel inspired and engaged as well.
Well, if I talk about the new sneakers, right, the new shoes or whatever, people will be like, well, Bun knows his shoes. I should probably go see what those shoes are about and maybe try to cop them. If I talk about the new car, a new jewelry, or a new restaurant, people value my opinion on these things, so they'll do it. So I'm like, if they're doing this based off of things I say, then I need to be more specific about what I'm talking about. And I need to talk about things that they should have an opinion about, that they should be trying to inform themselves about and form some kind of viewpoint. On the new album, we talk about the prison industrial complex. We talk about pharmaceutical companies. And I let people know what these things are actually about and what's really happening in our country. You know what I'm saying? But I have to do it in a way that's not preachy, right? I have to do it in a way where it's palatable to the average consumer. So I try to talk about things as simple as possible. And even if I do have to use proper terminology, I try to use it in correct context so that even if they don't know the word, don't know the definition, they can kind of draw a conclusion about what I'm talking about, you know?
Tell me a little bit about what's happening in Texas, because you have an inside purview on what's happening. And we see there's an important Senate race that is coming up. A lot of that has to do with the changing demographic within the census and those who are being accounted for. And those who are moving into Texas are starting to reshape the demographics, what that looks like, which is why Senator Ted Cruz, who's a Republican, who's in a competitive race with Beto. And so why do you think there is such a competitive nature now in Texas, and why Texas is possibly a purple state?
What we have now is an opportunity to make Texas unread, you know what I'm saying? So we are fighting very hard to let the candidates who are running against the people that represent the red, help them get their message out there as much as possible. We've had two different kind of engagements in Texas, and I think in America as well. I think people of color got engaged because a candidate of color got engaged. So in 2008 and 2012, we saw higher turnouts with people of color. So people were excited to vote because there were candidates that looked like them, that to them seemed like reflected their life, their struggle, their culture, and what they're into. Well, the opposite thing happened after that, right? A lot of people resented the fact that someone of color was running the country. And so another fan base of people that didn't normally vote stepped up and voted again. So we had two different kinds of engagement over the last 12 years in politics. And so now what we have to do is make sure that this first base that was engaged in 2008 and 2012 has candidates that they can look to that is actually speaking to their community, speaking to their needs and their wants. Because a lot of people didn't necessarily get that from Hillary Clinton. It's not what they felt. It doesn't matter if that's what she was really doing. Yeah. They didn't feel that from her. You know what I'm saying? So people like Beto are extremely passionate. You know, he's a DIY politician. You know, he's in his car driving himself around, he's been to every county in Texas that is represented in the state, and he's let his voice be heard, and he's been talking to the people, and he's been listening and just trying to get a different message out and let people feel a different kind of candidate. I think for a lot of times, you know, people are like, well, who do I vote for, this boring white guy or that boring white guy? You know what I'm saying? And now there's different people with different choices that represent different agendas and, you know, are looking to make the state of Texas reflective of the diversity that actually exists. You know, we feel that we need representation in our local government and our state government that reflects that. And I think Beto's the perfect candidate.
Now, but I've been saying that, say what you want about President Trump, right? Say what you want about his politics and what he represents. What I think that the country responded to, a certain part of the country responded to, was this newness of a politician, this newness of someone who didn't read the teleprompter, this newness of someone who didn't go beyond, who didn't stick to talking points. He had no talking points. And there was something about, I think, that style of candidate that the country gravitated towards. I think that our country didn't want to see the same old candidate, you know, this cookie cutter type. I'm curious, what is your take on that? And if that's so, do you think that's why we're seeing a shift in candidates that we're seeing right now? We're seeing the first transgender woman to run for a major party's candidate for governor in the state of Vermont. We see now 2 Muslim congresspersons going into the Congress for the first time. We see women in large numbers. We see a large number of blacks running for Congress now at the same time. So I'm beginning to think we're seeing different candidates because now the electorate wants different. What are your thoughts to that?
Well, I think, you know, the demographic of this country is changing. And I think when you look at the racial makeup of America, that the numbers are changing for the minorities in America. And as these numbers grow, these people want to become more involved in America and being a part of the American process. And one big part of that, the biggest part of that, is voting. right? Your vote is the number one way to make yourself be heard in D.C. and in the Senate and all these places. So you have people that are like, okay, well, I'm paying my taxes, I'm working, I'm raising children, but everybody that's making the decisions that affect my life don't look like me, don't come from my struggle, don't represent my struggle, have no frame of reference for my culture. And so it's like now people are like, well, if there's a candidate that I feel better reflects that, that's who I'm going to go for. And now people who come from those communities are like, you know what? I'm tired of the same old guy running in my district that doesn't do anything in my district. I'm going to run in my district because I know what my district needs because I live in this district. It's a step-by-step process, right? So it takes a little while to get there, but it's happening now. Now, it's still somewhat behind. Because some people are afraid to disrupt the status quo. It's just about people paying more attention to candidates being more reflective of the communities that they represent, and just a different level of awareness. I think with social media now, we get a lot more information on these people than we normally would get. So even if you don't watch CNN, even if you don't subscribe to a newspaper, you're still going to be privy to the conversations that are happening one way or another. But I think we're closer than we've ever been, and I don't think we should give up on the process, the electoral process. I think we should continue to support candidates that we truly believe in. I think we should fight to get the word out about those candidates and really help and get the other people in our respective communities engaged. What we need is for people to not just come out and listen and clap and applaud and be like, you're different. We need people to register and people to vote. Because that's the one thing I would say. When I went to a Hillary Clinton rally, I would see people that were there that were interested, but I couldn't say that everybody in that room was going to vote. When I go to a Bernie Sanders rally, I would see people in there, they were engaged or whatever, but it was a lot of young people, and I couldn't say that everybody in that room was going to vote. But when I went to a Trump rally, I was absolutely certain that everyone in that room, after leaving that room, was going to go and vote for that candidate.
Yeah. You are talking and describing a candidate that is you. So I'm not going to put any pressure on you.
Yeah,
so
please
I'm going to leave it at that.
I still have a day job.
Yeah.
So.
But I do want to say that you are describing a candidate as you, and that's also why I knew you were so perfect for this show, because this is what we talk about so often here on this show, is that the electorate want something different.
Right.
But I think that goes to a lot of the data collection and really getting good data that has a better understanding of our electorate and has a better understanding of our demographic. And what's interesting, Bun, is that is what this episode is going to do a deep dive into, is data and how data collection properly will help make hopefully the two-party structure system or other parties see exactly what you're talking about and how to run better candidates and have better success for that. Bun B, I cannot thank you so much for your time and coming on the Mike Muse Show.
It's an amazing conversation.
Yeah. How can people reach you further online?
Well, they can find me on social media at on Instagram at The Real Trillionaires, on Twitter at Bun B Trill-OG, and on Facebook I have a Bernard Freeman page, which is my personal page, and then I have the Bun B fan page, which we also use to interact with the most people. It gives us the ability to touch the most people at the same time.
That's awesome. And don't forget, check out his latest project that drops this Friday, August 31st. Stay with us, ladies and gentlemen. We have Alicia Garza from Black Lives Matter coming up to really talk about data and data collection for better outcomes of our election cycle. Stay tuned here on Sirius XM Insight Channel.
Already.
I'm a G, that's a genius, best to just respect. My thug and main is the South, ain't nothing above it, and that's why I love it, man. Well, it's Big Bun Beater, baby, Mr. Wood Grain. With diamonds up against them, ballin' through your hood, man. And I'm smoking on some good, man. The color purple, not the movie, but the kind that have you going in a circle. Chrome looking more glassy than the Transco Tower. My car dripping candy paint like it just came out the shower. Like face, I got the money, the power, and the finesse to roll around one deep with 100,000 round my neck.
All right, what's happening in America? It's your boy Mike Muse. I'm just gonna jump right into it. As we know, the midterms are coming up, and it's a very important midterm election, and it's going to roll into a very important 2020 election. We want to make sure that our voices are heard from across the spectrum, and we want to make sure that everyone's really represented into the space, into this dynamic, and that everyone not only vote counts and is counted for, but every voice is heard and has the opportunity to be counted and to be heard. And so my guests that I have today really reflect that narrative of making sure all voices are heard in a very impactful, important, and strategic way. She really needs no introduction, but to give her the credit and respect that she deserves, she goes by the name of Alicia Garza. I know you guys have heard that name. She's an Oakland-based organizer, writer, public speaker, a freedom dreamer, I like that, freedom dreamer. I would like for somebody to call me a freedom dreamer one day with that. But long story short, she is a co-founder of the Black Lives Matter movement. Her and her two other colleagues really founded this movement, and it has turned into a wave. It has become part of our political lexicon. It's become of our national discourse to really bring these conversations to the forefront of things that are impacting the Black community from across the board and across the spectrum. But most importantly, as a queer Black woman, Garza's leadership and work challenges the misconception that only cisgender Black men encounter police and state violence. While, of course, the tragic death of Trayvon Martin and Mike Brown were catalysts for the emergence of the Black Lives Matter movement, Garza is clear that in order to truly understand how devastating and widespread the violence is, Black America, we must view the epidemic threat through the lens of race, gender, sexual orientation, and gender identity. And I couldn't be more supportive of that because a lot of times we look at things as from this very linear, segmented way of doing that. But Alicia, of course, being who she is, she's a dreamer. She didn't stop there. She has went on to create the Black Futures Lab with an incredible team. The work of the Black Futures Lab work with Black people to transform our communities, building Black political power, and changing the way that power operates locally, statewide, and nationally. And that's it right there. Even the term locally, we don't really focus on local politics too much. We really have this idea of like this national entity and what's happening in Capitol Hill and what's happening on 1600 Pennsylvania. And yes, it is important, but there's so much work that goes into the local and the locality of it. And how does that have an impact on what we're doing? And in order to really understand the local, you have to build a census. I'm sure we all are familiar with the Census 2020 report. Well, the Black Futures Lab, under the direction of Alicia, has engaged in the Black Census report to really understand from a community aspect of it, what are our needs? Because far too often you hear in the political discourse that, you know, Blacks are not monolithic, but sometimes politicals do create strategy as if we are monolithic. And again, it's about strategy. And so our guests that we have today are really about identifying solutions to these challenges that we have. And so enough of me talking about all of this. I think a person who could be better off to explain all of this is Alicia Garza. So please join me in welcoming Alicia Garza to the Mike Muse Show. What's up, Alicia?
Hey, how you doing?
Did I get everything right, man?
You got everything right. This is amazing.
Good. I had to do you justice, man, because the work you do is just so important. And I just think that people look at a term as the hashtag Black Lives Matter, and don't really understand the power of a hashtag. But to me, what that represents was not just the power of the hashtag, yes, but the power of just getting up and doing something. You know, you weren't a household name prior to, and look at what it's become. Talk to us about that moment and what it's like to just say, you know, I'm going to do something.
You know, we feel really grateful, I think, for all of the ways in which people have answered that call. We didn't plan for that to happen, to be honest. I mean, when George Zimmerman was acquitted in Trayvon's murder, I wrote a post on Facebook that was a love letter to Black people, because all of the things I was seeing in my timeline were really things that were not just negative about our communities, but also incredibly cynical about the possibility of change. So we would see things like people saying, well, this was terrible, but that's why we need our kids to pull their pants up, or that's why we need our kids to not wear hoodies. And you'll remember that in the state of Oklahoma, they actually tried to pass a bill banning the wearing of hoodies in schools. Yeah. And that's not even really the primary reason that state violence happens, right? It's not about what you wear. It's not about whether or not you've got your pants around your ankles or around your waist, or whether you have 8 degrees or no degrees. It's very much about the ways in which our political systems, and in particular our criminal justice system, is set up to really disenfranchise families and communities that are structurally locked out of being able to access the things that we need to live well and to live with dignity. And so that post was really about wanting to make sure that we understood how powerful we are, and that we weren't taking on the responsibility of a system that we didn't build, but at the same time that we do take up the responsibility of doing what we need to do to dismantle it, so that no other mother has to lose her child before it's time, so that no other family has to have an empty seat at the dinner table, right? Yeah. So a love letter to Black people in a moment of extreme crisis and chaos that ended with the phrase, "Our lives matter" and "Black lives matter." And my sister Patrice put a hashtag in front of it. And I'll be honest, I'm not on Twitter like that. So I was like, why are you putting the pound sign in front of this thing? What does that mean? What are you doing? But what that allowed us to do, right, was have a conversation, get in a conversation that was already happening on social media and try to connect people who are also trying to figure out, why is this happening? It's, at that time, it was 2013. It wasn't 1954. It wasn't 1965. So why are we still seeing grown adults being acquitted in the murder of children who are doing nothing but trying to live their lives? And alongside with Opal, we created a series of platforms on social media for people to have that conversation in a way where they could access information, but more importantly, in a way that they could access each other. So we were getting a lot of things that people were sending us, like, hey, I'm a teacher in Kentucky and I want my students to know that their lives matter. And I was like, hey, I'm not a teacher, but I've gotten 10 other emails today from people like you who want to do the same thing. So y'all should connect. And that's really how this began. So it's incredibly humbling to see that not only can we use social media to make change by bringing people together in real life to do stuff in their communities, but it's also incredibly humbling to know that we are a part of a long line of freedom fighters, and that this is our contribution to what has been a incredible, beautiful, and complex Black freedom movement.
It was interesting. I'm very familiar with the Black Lives Matter movement, and I've seen you give conversations and I've seen you talk, but for some reason in this moment right now is crystallizing a little bit more of really what Black Lives Matter was intended for. I think it's really gotten lost in the conversation and everyone's else interpretation of it. And so sometimes when that travels, you get further and further of the origin stories of it. And what I'm gathering from you is that it was essentially a resource.
That's right.
And a way to access information. And wow, has that gotten lost into the conversation with that? But there's one thing I want to really focus on. So I'm glad we had the opportunity to really drive that emphasis home. You use the word structure. And the reason why I want to focus on structure is because what makes you believe that you could go against the structure and to change that structure? Because there's so many individuals who are listening and watching this conversation right now who believe that they're not degreed enough. They don't have 1 million followers on Twitter or on Instagram. And so how could I go against structure, or how could I change structure? So what was it about you that said, I can do this?
Well, I'll tell you, it's my training as an organizer. So I am someone who, when I was 22 years old, participated in this program called the School of Unity and Liberation, where they would take young people of color and place them like an internship in community-based organizations. And you would go through a whole program that taught you how to use the tools that we have available to us to make change. And I didn't have a ton of followers on social media. I had my networks, and then we tapped into those networks to be able to help us craft what we were doing, but also spread the message. We tapped into people who were connected to media. We tapped into Black media makers in particular. When Patrice and Darnell Moore organized the Freedom Ride to Ferguson, that was really about tapping into your relationships and people who know people who know people who might kind of be down to do something with us. And even if we didn't know exactly what it was, they were like, well, what about this? Or how about this? So that's how we were able to get people from all over the country in 10 days to jump on a bus or jump on a train or a plane and to bring the resources that they had to be able to contribute, right, to making a change.
Well, with that, I think listeners, if you're out there, it's all about just identifying what resources you have within and whatever that may be in order to help assist you. As you're hearing Alicia talk about it, she didn't do it by herself. She reached out to her tribe, essentially.
That's right.
And then her tribe was able to assist her. And so sometimes we don't have to go at it alone. Just start whatever your immediate resources are and then take it from there. Let's just go into the future now, i.e. Black Futures Lab. Tell us a little bit about that. I described it as locally, statewide, and nationally, and building this political base and structure. But in your own words, what is that?
Well, what we do is we work to make Black people powerful in politics. And part of the challenge that we're trying to address is that everybody's talking about Black people. Black is now a brand, right? It's like cool to talk about how you believe that Black people's lives matter. But there's all kinds of systems and structures and laws and policies that actually go against that. And so what we've created is a place where we can experiment with how it is that we change laws and policies and build new structures, new laws, and new policies that give our communities the things that we deserve and that everybody deserves to be able to live well. And our first project is the Black Census Project. And we have set out to talk to 200,000 Black people across the nation from all different backgrounds to find out more about what we care about, what we experience in the economy, in our communities, with government, and to ask us, what do we want for our futures? And what we found is that we don't get asked that question very often. We get told what we think, told what we feel. We get put in a lot of different boxes and say, well, this is how the Black community is. But we are incredibly complex and diverse, and we really wanted to celebrate that. And we're using that data to impact and influence policy in cities and states.
What I like about this particular project, and listeners, you know me, I'm a sucker for data. And I love data, and I love numbers, and I love statistics, I love facts, because sometimes you get caught up in this emotional conversation, right? And we don't put any meat to it, right? And there's nothing wrong with emotional-based conversations. I'm not judging anyone or anybody's movement, but unless you have the data, you can't strategically target specifically and how to put the resources there. And so that's why I was so excited when I found out about the Black Census Project, and I wanted to amplify it as much as I could because I've actually began the process of it. And it's really easy, listeners. And we're going to give out all the information at the end of this episode to go through it. But even the questions you were asking me, I was like, yo, they're really trying to understand the nuance of who I am. And for the first time, I felt like they're trying to see the whole me and really recognize that I'm unique to every other experience, right? And so I salute you for what you guys are trying to do for identifying that, because the local, the state, the national officials can then look at that data and then look at that set of information in order to provide great policy and great strategies going forward, because we are not a one-size-fits-all.
That's absolutely right.
I mean, Alicia, I think that's a really good time, and speaking of data, to bring in our next guest, who really does data in his own way, in his own sense of activism. And I thought he would be a really great complement to the work that you're doing, because his work consists of data. And it consists of facts and stats. And I think that, again, to listening audience, that's so important to whatever movements that, you're interested in creating and starting. You can't forget the data. I'm such a data geek, Alicia. Sorry about that. That's the engineer in me, man. It's the engineering in me. But ladies and gentlemen, the person I want to bring into the conversation now, I mean, he has incredible background. His name is Dr. Matt Barreto. I was learned to make sure the E is silent. Has published research articles on voter ID laws and voter suppression, and has authored numerous reports. He served as an expert witness in lawsuits challenging voter ID laws and voter suppression, most recently in Fish v. Kobach in Kansas. And I think I'm going to ask him a couple questions about that, because he is the new Republican governor for Kansas. That's going to be an interesting conversation. Break Bill versus Yeager in North Dakota. And he has been hired by the ACLU, the NAACP, Mexican American Legal Defense Fund, Native American Rights Fund, and others to serve as an expert witness on voter rights laws. Dr. Barreto is a professor of political science and Chicano studies at UCLA, and he's a co-founder of the research and polling firm Latino Decisions. I mean, Alicia, you have some credibility too as well, but Dr. Barreto here, he has been listed by Time Magazine as for Latino Decisions as one of the most important think tank and go-to resources for the Latino community. And so without further ado, I just want to bring the conversation Dr. Matt Barreto. What's going on, Matt?
Hey, thanks for having me. It's my pleasure to be here.
No problem, man. Congratulations, man, on all your work. And what I found most notable was that the work that you have published, Ethnic Cues, the role of shared ethnicity in Latino political behavior, is published by my alma mater, University of Michigan. So go Blue.
All right, there you go. That's great.
So at a long story short, man, what is Latino Decisions?
Well, we are a polling and research firm doing polls of Latino Americans across the country, focus groups, research studies, trying to get the most accurate, comprehensive, and culturally competent data on Latinos that we can then lift up, that we can share with the media, we can share with policymakers in Washington, D.C. And we were very frustrated at the outset when we started this firm back in 2007 that there just wasn't a lot of large data sets of Latinos. There was maybe a national survey that included 50 folks, and it was all entirely done in English. And so we started doing this polling to make sure that Latino voices were included in the public opinion narrative, that the media was paying attention, that candidates were paying attention, that policymakers were paying attention. And so that's what we do. We continue to collect data. We continue to report it out, share it with people, and make sure that we can lift those voices up so when policy debates are happening, the Latino perspective is taken into account.
Hey, Matt, before this, why do you think the challenges, because, we were talking a minute ago about structures. What were some of the challenges of why a lot of Latinos weren't getting included in a lot of this data, a lot of this research, and a lot of this polling? And do you believe that the solution has been addressed, or is it still a challenge that the Latino community is facing?
No, it's definitely still ongoing. I mean, unfortunately, there's still a number of national polls that are done, even in 2018, that are only done in English, that these mainstream polling outfits, they just assume that only English speakers can be Americans or can be voters. And it's not just being able to do those surveys in Spanish, which we do, but being able to also offer those surveys in a number of different Asian languages as well to make sure that those communities are counted. So that's still ongoing. But when we started this, it was really just abysmal. There was this notion that Latinos were outside of the American political system, that they were immigrants, that they were foreigners, that they weren't participants. And so there wasn't that focus and that effort to make sure that the samples, that when you did a sample of Americans or of voters, to make sure that you had an accurate sample of Latinos in there as well. And so we really tried to push, and we tried to bring our social science credentials that we had to bear and say, hey, there's an accurate way to do this. There's a scientific way to do this, to get data, to make sure it's accurate. But let's not forget about this community, which, is now the largest minority group in the United States and the fastest growing part of the electorate. We want to make sure that that is added. And we continue to remind people every year when we're consulting, when we're just talking on panels, you have to make sure that your sample is accurate. Don't just assume that because you have 42 Mexicans in your sample that you have a good sample. It's probably not good. You need to go out of your way to make sure you offer it in Spanish, to make sure you have enough immigrants, second generation, third generation. And by taking that care, then you can get an accurate portrait of our community. I'm
smiling right now. I wish you could see me smiling, because that's essentially what we're talking about, not only just in this conversation, but a lot of us talk about, at brunch, at dinners, at happy hour, right? The challenges that people of color face in the sense of this one-dimensional notion. Just as we were talking about, Matt, with Black culture, it seems like what you're saying right now is also too prevalent in how individuals see Latinos in terms of this one-size-fits-all narratives. And I think we often forget about, again, the structures and the barriers that are in place to make sure we get the best data collected. But Matt, I want to just play devil's advocate, if you will. A lot of times, as we've seen recently, people have their opinions on polls, and they say polls aren't accurate and polls doesn't give you a good snapshot. For you, why do you believe polls matter? And then also, two, what are some of the effects of the polling that you guys have been able to do for the Latino community that's actually been able to provide, data-proven results, or been, results-oriented based upon the data that you guys have been able to collect?
Well, sure. Let's start with the first one. Why do polls matter? Well, our policymakers and our media still rely on gauging public opinion to try to understand the direction of the country. Are these policies popular? Are these things that should be on the agenda? Are these items that we should be debating? Which direction does the country want to go on this issue? You'll see those reported constantly in the news media as they attempt to sort of understand what is the pulse of America, what do they feel right now. And so it's important that just from that perspective, when the media are reporting polls, that they're doing them from a perspective that's accurate, that there are large Latino samples, African American samples, Asian American samples, so that they can break down the poll and say this is how white Americans think, but this is how Black Americans or Latino Americans think about these issues, and really dissect that. So that's the first, and that goes to setting the agenda, which numerous studies have shown that as the media reports out polls and reports out public opinion growing on a topic, it then starts to seep into Washington, D.C., and that's the second component. We know not just candidates care about polls when they're running for election, but those incumbent policymakers, whether they're elected or appointed, they're looking at what the American public wants. What do they have an appetite for? Do they want to see movement on this topic? And it sort of is a chance for the American public to influence the policy process in between election cycles to say we want to see action on this topic. And again, if those polls are being reported up to policymakers, we all just hope that they're accurate, that they're an accurate portrait of all Americans, not just suburban white Americans or this new focus that we have now on working class white Americans without a college degree. We want to make sure that all communities are included in those polls so that both the media and policymakers have accurate data to rely on, because we know they are looking at public opinion, and we know that it does, to some degree, it does influence the way that they make policy.
I'm just thinking about right now in terms of this data and how great it is in terms of, one, I'm glad that you brought to the forefront the importance of polling, because I believe a lot of times people try to discredit the value of a poll based upon the election, the past results of our 2016 elections. But also, too, I'm just thinking through in terms of how important data collection is, just looking at the states of like California and looking at the states of Texas. If you look at the number of Latino Americans who are in those states and the power that they hold, and they may not even know themselves how powerful their demographic is because they haven't seen the polls and the opinion pieces to even get them to understand their full potential in order to push legislation forward. What do you think is happening right now in Texas? Because it seems to be there's two races that are coming up. Well, one in particular that's coming to mind, and that's, the Senator Cruz, and also on the Republican side, going against his Democratic opponent, Beto O'Rourke. And so I'm just curious, what role do you think Latinos have in the outcome of this election that's coming up in Texas?
Well, certainly Texas is going to be one of the marquee U.S. Senate elections to watch. Ted Cruz has a lot of publicity surrounding his campaign as a presidential candidate and a very controversial, very sort of extreme conservative figure in the U.S. Senate. There's a lot of eyes on that race. And Beto O'Rourke is running a very strong grassroots campaign right now. He's getting a lot of attention. He's got a lot of really large, well-attended rallies. And so for the first time, you're seeing a very highly competitive Senate race in the state of Texas, a state that Republicans usually carry easily by double digits. If Beto O'Rourke is to be successful in that race, he's going to need very strong support from the Latino community. When you look at the numbers, he's already doing very well in the African-American community, and it looks like, from looking at other states, African-American enthusiasm is up this year. We saw that in Alabama, we saw that in Virginia and other places. So in Texas, it's really going to take the Latino vote, which is much larger, but has historically voted at very low rates in Texas because of underinvestment, lack of outreach. So a lot of people are watching and saying, well, what is the party going to do, meaning the Democratic Party? What is the O'Rourke campaign going to be doing? And then what are the other Latino advocacy groups doing? There's really sort of three moving parts. They all need to be going out, reaching out, explaining why this election is important, explaining why your vote matters, and how you can change policy and politics by getting out and voting. And so it's going to be very exciting. There's going to be a lot of discussion. But the question mark is whether or not there's going to be that investment, right? Because nothing just comes automatically. People don't just show up and vote automatically. Someone has to cultivate that. Someone has to connect with the voters. We have to believe that there's a candidate that we believe in who will make things better. And so we're waiting to see if that happens, because historically in Texas, at least for the last 25 years or so, it's really been a one-party state, and there hasn't been a lot of outreach to people of color there.
Well, Alicia, with that being said, Matt is talking excellently about the notion of engagement and participation and resources that are needed. With the work that you're doing with the Black Census, I know you guys, are going door to door and you guys are knocking, and resources are needed for that. We all know people of color, whether you're Black American, Latino American, there is a skepticism when someone's knocking on your door for anything. Mm-hmm. So how are you guys overcoming that barrier in terms of getting people to commit to answering your questions in order to gather the needed resources that are there in order so that you can provide good data sets?
Mm-hmm. The first thing we're doing is we are partnering with local community-based organizations that are rooted in Black communities in 27 states across the country. Because certainly what we know is that when you have a relationship with someone, you're more likely to tell your story, share your experiences, and want to have some level of connection. One other thing that we're doing is we've translated our census project into 8 languages that Black people speak in this country. When we talk about Black folks not being a monolith, we have to just be clear that not all Black people were born here, raised here, and share the same kind of cultural attributes, right? So We've done that, and that has been incredible. We did a launch of our Spanish language survey and really targeted Afro-Latinos in particular, and we got a really good response from folks saying nobody ever talks to us. So that's another thing we've done. And then the other thing that we're doing with the Black Census and the Black Futures Lab is we're training our people, how to translate their experiences into policy. So we've created an institute called Black to the Future, where we're training grassroots leaders how to take their solutions on ways that people are already getting around really troublesome problems and making that law, and then figuring out how we resource it so that it's permanent, so that it becomes the norm instead of the thing that we do to get around the norm.
What you said struck out to me, and in the political work that I've done, I've always noticed when I knocked on the door, when I made the phone call, or even when I sent the email and invited them to an event, normally Black and Latinos always say, no one's ever invited me. And I think you saying that today is just such a reminder of how often we are left out of that conversation. And so, Matt, with you, I want to know the same thing for you in terms of, is that the general senses that you feel too when you guys are knocking on doors or you're making your calls and to really get the polling done? Did you get that response of no one's ever thought to come talk to us in this capacity?
Oh, definitely. I mean, sometimes when we complete these surveys in immigrant communities, we think we're starting out on a little 10-minute survey, and then we're on the phone for 25 minutes because the person has never participated in a poll, they've never been contacted, and they're so eager to tell us their opinion. And when we talk to other pollsters, they say, oh, it's really hard to do surveying in immigrant communities. And we always say it's not. You just have to call them up, be bicultural, bilingual, and willing to hear their opinion, and they will talk to you. And so there's a real hunger, I think, in these underserved communities across the board to be included. And sometimes traditional mainstream politics does not connect in our communities, I think, both in Black and Brown. And so we have to be making sure that we're making those inroads, that we're making those asks in the community, and we're doing it from a community-sponsored way. And so I would totally agree with what Alicia said, and I hope that more of us are doing that.
So I'm going to ask you both the same final question, and that is, do you think that's a result of laziness on behalf of nonprofit organizations, on behalf of think tanks, on behalf of policymakers, or do you believe that it's implicit biases that are allowing them not to think through and be solution-oriented on how to push through these barriers?
I think our communities know viscerally when we are wanted and when we're not. And I think that when we look at the increase of voter suppression efforts across the nation, when we look at the ways that people are treated when they're trying to access education or healthcare, it doesn't actually surprise me that there is a feeling like we're not wanted. People don't want our participation. And so what we have to do at the lab is we actually have to acknowledge that for people, because they are hearing messages, of course, also that say, oh, well, Black people are just lazy and don't want to participate. Black people don't care about these issues. You know, if Black people would spend more time caring about the issues than buying Jordans, then maybe we'd have a change. And what we say is, well, there's also a reality that our political system continues to fail Black people at every stage. And so when we're pushing for policies or when we're doing electoral work in our C4 and pushing for candidates, we are very clear that it's important to acknowledge that the political system has failed Black people, and at the same time that we won't be able to change that dynamic unless we have the active engagement, shaping, and participation of every Black person who cares about not being excluded, not being at the table, and not having their voice heard.
Wow. Matt, your response.
I think out of the options you laid out in terms of laziness, neglect, willful, I think it's willful. I think it's not just community-based organizations. I think they're trying. I think it's not the nonprofit organizations. I think they're trying. I think it's the structural groups. It's parties, it's campaigns, it's government agencies. They're purposely ignoring these communities because they don't see them as active participants. And so they say, why should we come there and do outreach in town halls there? Why should we come and cultivate your vote? So we have to change that by being part of the system, whether it's the work that we're doing as political consultants or as community organizers or running for Congress or as voters. because I do think that it is willful neglect. They're ignoring us, and they think they can get away with it, and they can't. So the more we take part, the more we push them to come to our community, I think the more we can start to change things. And it is getting better. It is starting to turn, but we need to push harder to make sure that the institutions, that the structures, the formal structures are paying attention to these minority communities. And the best way we can do that is by getting out to vote.
You guys are dope. I just love that every time I have a conversation, I like to walk away learning something and being surprised by things. And this conversation I learned so much from the both of you, and I was surprised by a lot of things. And that's when you know it's good. And I just thank you guys for bringing your authentic selves to the conversation and not being afraid to use the word accountability, right? and through your words, being accountable. And I think, we have a large listening audience, and I'm happy that we were solution-oriented in our short amount of time that we had here today and trying to figure out the solutions and how we can amplify those solutions to hold other government entities and structures responsible for this. Matt, how can people reach you on social media to keep the conversation going and with you, and also too, how can they get involved with Latino Decisions, if you can give that information out too as well?
Sure. First of all, thanks, Mike, for having me on. It was a real pleasure to be on the show. They can find me at real M.A. Barreto on Twitter or at Latino Decisions, and they can check us out there on Twitter or just go to latinodecisions.com. We have all of our polls there. You can sort through, see what Latinos think about all the different policy issues across the different states, and see what we're up to and what our next poll is going to be.
Awesome. And Alicia?
You can check us out at blackcensus.org if you want to take the survey. If you want to learn more about the Black Futures Lab, we have a website, www.blackfutureslab.org. And we're also on every social media site, so hit us up, Black Futures Lab on Twitter, Instagram, and on Facebook. That
is awesome. You guys, thank you so much. Please come back. You both have an open invitation to come back and help amplify your work, and that's my commitment to being part of the solution. So thank you both for your time.
You get the case and they get your weight and your G's. Come on. I used to ride the boat off the city streets with a chick with pretty feet and a box of fitted sweets. They tried to finish me but couldn't get it done. So somebody told the law Big Bun was the one riding dirty. Man, somebody told the law Big Bun was the one riding dirty. What's up, PA?
Sit Down with Alfred and Chris.
A discussion of music,
movies, television.
It's like your local newspaper's art section.
Is Twin Peaks more influential than the Larry Sanders Show?
Who's the best Anderson?
Paul Thomas or Wes?
It's a lifestyle show. We discuss fandom with celebrities, writers, critics,
and comedians.
Where's the oldest bar in New York?
But Spielberg's best movie. It's Sit Down with Alfred
and Chris.
Now on Thursdays at 6 p.m. East
on SiriusXM Insight 121.
And on demand.
Anytime on your SiriusXM app.
Cars really are all about style, design, speed, passion.
I'm Daron Levine, host of In the Driver's Seat on Sirius XM Insight.
In the Driver's Seat is about cars, number one. We're going to bring experts to tell you about what's happening in the automobile industry. Americans are all about freedom. Cars are the greatest expression of the people we want to be.
In the Driver's Seat with award-winning automotive journalist Daron Levine. Saturdays at noon East on Sirius XM Insight Channel 121. Or listen on your phone when you get out of the car with the Sirius XM app.